Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here today for this whole event of Polkadot Decoded, and really appreciate everyone who's here to listen to my presentation. I'm really excited to be kind of unveiling a little bit of what InvArch is and what we're doing. Through this presentation, I'm going to be unveiling a hack into of using XCM to realize something that is radically powerful for Polkadot and for all of Web3. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. So today we'll go ahead and I'll briefly introduce InvArch, so what we are, what the project is, Imb4, which is a very critical key protocol that is part of the network, a brief little refresher into XCM, cross-chain or cross-consensus messaging, go into XCA, which is a novel protocol for InvArch, which is cross-chain authentication. And we'll cap things off by looking kind of towards the future of Web3 with all of this technology in place and how it can fundamentally reshape the future for Web3. So before we dive into the project, a little introduction to the team. It's a fairly small team, but very productive, really powerful team. There's myself, I'm the founder of InvArch. We also have two other co-founders, Gabe Madungus, who are in different locations right now, building the project, as well as our team, and we have several advisors. Some of our advisors actually come directly from the Polkadot ecosystem. So we have, for example, Marvin Tong, who's co-founder of Fala Network. We have Bruno Svort, who is the founder of the Remark protocol, so NFT, Remark 2.0 NFTs. And we also have Sonia Pristek as our legal advisor, who is the former legal counsel for Polkadot itself and currently for the New York Foundation as well. So what is InvArch? What's the InvArch network? So the InvArch network is a very new type of blockchain. It's a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily, we're not tapping into the world for DeFi. It's not necessarily about finance. It's even more than just NFTs and JPEGs that we've seen so far, and that was kind of in one sense heavily exploited during that last bull run. InvArch is comprised of three novel protocols. There is the Imb4 Protocol, which is what allows, it's our redefining of non-fungible assets on-chain. So we use Remark NFTs. We have this really powerful standard. It's extraordinarily composable. How composable is it? These NFTs are so composable that they are integratable with Git, and you can manage and use them seamlessly, transparently using your CLI to manage them, push changes to the chain. So in the same exact level of composability that all of Web 2 and the entire world is already used to dealing with and managing files and folders on their computers, their local devices, and across the internet, is the same exact experience that we provide with the Imb4 protocol. We also have the OSIF protocol, which stands for On-Chain Innovation Funding. It's comprised of three different mechanisms. We have IP staking, which is a way for individuals, similar to Astar, who you guys heard earlier. Individuals are able to kind of elect projects or initiatives that they support, and in doing so, there are funds generated through inflation, come from the network, that help to kickstart, to bootstrap a lot of these initiatives. There's IP farming, which allows individuals to offer a form of token in exchange for obviously funding, so there's a certain yield that they give up. And then third, we have on-chain donations as well. So a way for individuals or groups to donate, legally speaking, to the InvArch Foundation, which then provides grants to the owners of these projects, which, depending on where you live, could be tax deductible. So there's some big benefits there. And again, it's on-chain and it's transparent, so it's really important. And then finally, which we'll talk about later, there's the XCA protocol, so cross-chain authentication, which, again, I'm really excited for because this is going to help to realize a future where we have a plagiarism impossible internet. We also have the InvArch Tinkernet. We currently have our crowd loan running actually now on Kusama. And Tinkernet is more than just your average canary network. Tinkernet is focused on, again, providing that bootstrap, that square one for innovation to get started, to get that social feedback. We have a test net, which is where you want to actually test the safety of your features. But for individuals, whether they're a developer, someone using a dApp, someone building in a DAO, this is where you're able to get started. Maybe you don't have the funds to even deploy that first contract. This is where you don't need to necessarily worry about that because you can propose your idea, get the funding to get started, and then move forward from there, and eventually kind of graduate in a sense to the InvArch network. But with all that being said, the world is changing. Web 3 is changing everything. The way that we communicate, the way that we interact, that we collaborate with individuals is all changing. And yet, in this big new change, this era that we're living in, the one thing that has not fundamentally changed is how we store and how we manage our intellectual property. Today, we're still relying on centralized service providers, institutions, for one, on average, we pay lucrative amounts of money for a record of ownership, no proactive protection. It's hopefully, if someone does rip off your idea and you find out about it, then you can do something. So with all these changes and with Web3 bringing about this new creator economy, this collaboration era, intellectual property is horribly lagging. So InvArch introduces a new anatomy for assets, for intellectual property in Web3. We have IP sets. An IP set is, like I said, like a folder on your computer. They're interchangeable files, folders, or collections, NFTs, NFT collections that can be, again, interchangeably moved, swapped around, whatever need be. This is powered in part with the Remark NFT standard. Very, very powerful technology and extraordinarily composable. It's what allows you to have multi-resource NFTs, NFTs that own that NFT, that own this NFT, that own that NFT, the same way that you can construct a file that has folders with files and folders. It's the same exact process and really important for, again, composability in Web3. But what makes InvArch and the Imb4 Protocol very unique is on-chain licensing. So pegged to these assets are on-chain at the lowest level, not the dApp layer, it's at the very lowest level we have on-chain licensing, and these licenses can be anything from with code, like an MIT version agreement, or you could have something as complex as an actual IP contract, a licensing contract. And in that contract, different variables, different actors are defined, different permissions are defined, different tokens can be allocated to different individuals for different voting weights in different groups over different projects or different layers of governance over intellectual property, over something that's being built. So the level of composability there gets really, really flexible. And it's important to note that, again, we introduce this at the lowest level. We don't define how you must use these things. We don't tell you which agreements you must have in place, but we provide this very low-level framework for introducing a new way to define and manage data across Web3. And then pegged to these, we also have IP tokens, which, again, are different. Some people here might be used to what's called a refungible token or an RFT. It's an NFT that, obviously, at one point, it is non-fungible. The peg to it, the ownership, is then placed into fungible tokens. So you have 1 million tokens that now define the ownership over this one asset, and thus it has refungible characteristics. However, with IP tokens, what we have is you can have one class of fungible tokens that are pegged to something, and this could, and for one instance, represent your actual legal copyright ownership. You could have another class of fungible tokens that represent different levels of voting weights over that IP set. Kind of view that IP set as a DAO. You can have different tokens that even go to realize on-chain leveling systems. So different tokens are seen as different experience rates that are earned by different groups, depending on the groups that they're in. And these experience rates can help them to rank up, to gain more access in the venture, et cetera. But the point is that these are all possible. How they're used is completely up to developers. However, XCM takes this a heck of a lot further, and it's really incredible what can be achieved as a result. So, using cross-consensus messaging and fusing that with the power of Imb4 with InvArch, we're able to realize something that is, it's radically different, very new, and plainly, simply put, it's plagiarism impossible data. Why is this a big deal? Why does that matter? Apart from the fact that there's music NFTs which get ripped, and I will note you can still listen to on your local environment, but it would be impossible for, say, like a platform such as Spotify, where say there's an artist, there's a favorite artist of mine, he passed away, there's a bunch of music that his family estate owns, not to be publicly released yet, however, it still happens, and after about a month, it gets taken down. But what would be really powerful is you just didn't have to worry about that at all, because 36 seconds later, after this unauthorized file is produced, it becomes a dud, and it can't be played on those platforms. Even more importantly, why is this a big deal, is especially in Web3, especially in this DAO creator economy, we see a huge focus on incubation, on decentralized incubators, decentralized crowdfunding for initiative, for projects. It's one of the biggest, I'd say one of the biggest focuses among a lot of projects in the space, but I have one question. I don't mean to poke a hole in all of their business plans, but when someone proposes an idea on your platform and they've admitted I have this idea, but I'm missing X or Y or Z, what stops me or anyone else who has the means or the money to go and build that idea, what stops me from stealing it? the answer is nothing. There is no current solution for that. So what we have now are we have all of these platforms where people are pretty much exposing their ideas, their intellectual property, and in a sense kind of like to vultures. And we see this. There's plenty of people probably in this room who have had a great idea at some point, shared it on one platform, and then lo and behold, a few months later, oh, that's exactly what I was talking about. So having the ability to have data, have files, to have your intellectual property available publicly, but have it in a sense to where you can have a privacy layer, shout out to Manta Network. You can build a dApp that uses a privacy layer, which is very critical, very important for these, especially when it comes to collaboration. But in the same sense, though, if I choose who I expose my assets to, my data, I might know who's on the other side of that computer. I don't know who's standing behind them. I don't know who they share this information with. So what we need is a proactive solution to where when someone actually does rip the data and they produce it anywhere across Web3, that this can be detected. So this goes for music, art, any research, documentation, articles, code, film, all the other nice little icons that we have up on the board there. All of these are assets that can be derived from intellectual property. And these are all assets that it's important when individuals are collaborating that they have the ability to protect these assets. And again, there's a big misconception with NFTs and the rest of the world where an NFT does not necessarily mean it's the actual data is unique. It's that CID, which is extraordinarily powerful. But it's that CID, this record of ownership over something, that's the uniqueness. And in programming, that's what is also referenced for example, let's say airdrops. So this is why you can copy and paste, or you can right-click save as that Bored Ape, but you still don't get the airdrop. But nonetheless, there's other instances, such as, like I said, music, collaboration, where it actually really does hurt if someone does steal what you have, regardless of the CID. So very simply, XCA, so cross-chain authentication, this process, what happens is whenever a file is minted anywhere immediately across the Polkadot ecosystem, and then using later technologies such as XCM-over-bridges, connecting to all Web3 ecosystems, all different consensus models, what happens is whenever any asset is minted, a record of that file is then sent to the InvArch parachain. The InvArch parachain then computes what we call an IHP, an intellectual hash print, which I'll talk about in a second. It stores, indexes that, cross-references this file's hash print, this unique identifier, against all of the other identifiers. It uses things, there's sim hashes, there's min hashes, these different algorithms, rounding algorithms that help to find something that is an exact match. There's something called a Hamming distance. So it's basically a score of the similarities between files, even when there are alterations. And what it does is, again, provides a score for that to detect how similar this is. So we realize that, and as a result of that process, there is then a status that is computed. There's multiple different statuses, which I'll talk about in a second. But again, as a result of this, then that status can be updated, can affect the usability, the features of that data, and especially at the application layer can be enforced to where that data is then, it's no good. Expanding on that, I'll walk through this bit by bit, but expanding on that, and I use Fallow Network as an example. So let's say an individual, they mint an NFT on Fallow. They use Fallow to create an asset. Now, a record of that asset's metadata using XCM is then sent over to InvArch. So it's metadata, CID, or as Kilt, they've been working on, they have asset DIDs as well, which is really cool because that connects your verified, your DID, your identity, to that asset. That data is sent over to InvArch, where we then compute an intellectual hash print, an IHP. There's min hashes, sim hashes, SHA-258 encryption, and what happens is this hash print is not just one hash. It's a list of different hashes. It's a list of different hashes that all serve to compute, to recognize this unique fingerprint, because you have, like I said earlier, you have things that there's an exact match. But then what happens if I steal your image, but I change the background? We're still going to be able to detect that. We'll have a score, we'll show the Hamming distance, and from there, obviously be able to iterate and add even more complex levels of enforcement, depending on those scores, to help protect your data. After that IHP has been computed, it's then indexed, cross-referenced against all of the other hash prints that are in the system. And through leveling, there's different ways to organize these. The process gets a lot faster and faster, actually, as time goes on. And as a result, that asset, like I said, gets a status that is then computed. That status is then sent back using XCM to the origin source, so to the original chain where this was sent. and then that asset status is then updated. So if something is authorized, good to go, but if something is stolen, if it's not replicable and it's detected, then two things. One, that asset can then become a dud. It's not deleted, that's not how it works. The CID, that ownership over this asset will still be there, but it is unusable across Web3. Also, we have things in place where an individual will then be able to get notified as well. So unlike the US Patent Office, you pay your $15,000 average to go get that patent, you don't get notified if someone actually did steal your stuff. The difference is, instead of paying $15,000 for no proactive protection, I think it's approximately $1, and you get more protection than what the US government can provide. Oh, I went backwards, my bad. So as I mentioned earlier, there are those core XCA statuses, so cross-chain authentication statuses, and more will be added as time goes on or as need be arise, and these will be proposed and decided through community governance. But the 6 key ones, the core statuses, we have verified status, we have disputed. So in the instance that, let's say there is an asset, because XA also affects Web 2 as well. So crawling Web 2 databases in order to create these IHP, these hash prints for assets that don't even exist on Web 3 yet. That way, if I do see something, oh, I like this artwork on this forum I see, I'm going to steal it and mint it and sell it. That's impossible. Won't happen. But there's matters of disputed, there's matters of flag. So when something is obviously detected as a straight rip, so to speak, that'll be flagged. There's common good, which is important because there's going to be a lot of matters of intellectual property that should not be restricted. For example, Hello World, a simple program like that is something that we would probably want to have easily available, and that something like that would be common good. So, and especially in the world of code, a lot of like modular, commonly used functions would be something that you would cite as common good. There's open source, which a majority of people here know what open source is, open to collaboration, open to use, free to use, and there's replicable. And replicable basically means that, yes, this is a unique asset, but you are able to, just like in GitHub, you can fork this totally fine. So altogether, what InvArch realizes using this technology and what it brings to the Polkadot ecosystem, how it has the ability to fundamentally reshape the future, and built using Polkadot, built as XCM being that initial starting point that makes all of this possible. InvArch really does, it adds a lot to the ecosystem. So we have IP, like going over the architecture of InvArch. There's the Imb4 Protocol, so we have IP licenses, IP sets, the tokens, there's IP files, remark NFTs, on-chain innovation funding, so that's again IP farming, IP staking, on-chain IP donations, and most significantly cross-chain authentication to enforce the uniqueness of data. So again, that's IP management, IP authentication, and IP disputes. Connecting in with the rest of the ecosystem, I mean, we have different parachains and projects that focus on DeFi, derivatives, AI, automation, privacy, knowledge graphs, IoT, credentials, social, it really goes on and on. Being able to tap into these services for developers to build new applications that take hold of this is really important, because innovation is inevitable. This innovation is what drives us forward, but providing a new framework where individuals can build a dApp that you're using, let's say, InvArch IP sets, on-chain licensing, protecting your data, but then you're also building an application or a dApp that's using Kilt verified credentials, you're using Manta as a privacy layer. Let's say then you build this app, or we have IP to where there's a derivatives platform that is basically making derivatives bets and trading off of the success of these projects. You have the ability to have even IP-backed loans, IP-backed staking. It all gets really intricate, and with, shout out to Oak Network, on-chain automation, this is where you'll be able to have things such as whenever a RIP is detected, or whenever someone has like stolen your IP, those assets, automatically, boom, you can get a notification. You'll know about it within maybe less than a minute of it actually happening. You don't have to act on it, but now you know who is out there stealing your intellectual property. And like I said, this brings about a lot of new applications. We have decentralized incubators and crowdfunding platforms. There's actually a totally different thing I didn't get to mention, but if you look up InvArch, our Edu series on Medium, there's discrimination-resistant economic models, education platforms that can happen, gamification of metaverses through that on-chain leveling system that I had talked about, IP attribution and agreements all taking place on-chain, IP markets and IP finance. We have enterprise-level security for IP as well. And GitArch, Dallas SDK, some projects that we're working on. GitArch will actually be a GitHub, kind of a better replacement. GitHub on steroids, which actually protected data. It's kind of like reshape the world there. I'm talking over my time, so I apologize. But yeah, that's InvArch. I was a little nervous up here, so hopefully I was able to get everything across fairly well. If you have any questions, then feel free. You can grab me afterwards. I'm more than happy to break down everything, go into how it all truly works. But yeah, InvArch, XCM, we're going to realize plagiarism and possible data, and with that, radically reshape the potential for Web3 to where we have this new ecosystem, this new foundation that, for all the right reasons, at the lowest level, redefines the future of intellectual property. So, thank you. Thank you.